So the video goes on for another couple of minutes, but it's very similar situations where people just completely lose control of their emotions. They get what's called hijacked. Something triggers their emotional state, something triggers an event. You saw the guy throwing spit wads across the table, and eventually there were some professional wrestling moves going on there. But eventually somebody gets triggered, they give in, they let their emotions take control, and they are completely out of control. Their emotions are running their bodies. When we're talking about stress, and you can see that all those were actually hidden camera videos from one point in time. Most of them were in the 90s, 2000s. There was one sequence that was the movie The Office. That was the guy putting the phone down on the bubble wrap. Everything else was real hidden camera videos. And everything starts, for me, everything starts up here. When we're talking about stress, it all starts in your mindset. And I ran across this quote, just believe it or not, just this week from Ryan Day, head coach of Ohio State's football team, the Ohio State University's football team. And it really speaks to the power of the mindset. Everything starts up here. It starts with a thought. Thoughts are translated to feelings. Feelings are translated over to words. And eventually they become actions and behaviors. So keep that in mind as we start talking about this evening, as we start talking about stress and performance. And what we really want to start thinking about is this link between stress and performance. And this was put in by, I think it's Yerkes Dodson, not Yerkes Dodson, but this came out in 1908. And it shows a nice gradual bell-shaped curve. So the idea is a little bit of stress, you get moving, get the energy flowing, get your blood flowing, you increase your performance. At some point in time, it becomes too much to handle. And then you get this nice little gradual decline where it really starts slowing down, and then you increase the stress a little bit more, it gets a little bit, your performance goes down a little worse and a little worse. And what I found is that's not really the case these days. So we start thinking about that curve. Nowadays, it's a lot different than it was in 1908. It's not this nice little gradual decline on the backside. You hit what I call an inflection point up at the top that I have in gray there. As soon as you hit that, your performance drops very rapidly. That's that quicksand. You start getting too stressed out, your performance starts going down. The more you struggle, the worse it gets, and your performance drops off very rapidly. The sweet spot that we're looking for is backing away from that inflection point. So we want to come down a little bit here and actually start looking at giving us a little bit of a cushion. So for me, the sweet spot, the biggest performance or the peak performance level now is not at the peak of the curve, just a little bit below. It's enough stress to get your blood flowing, to get you moving, to get your energy focused, things like that. But you still have a cushion, so if that stress level keeps going up, you're not falling off that cliff. You're not falling into that quicksand. Now, a lot of professional athletes, if you look at the very top of this chart, you'll see there's a curve that goes up. With a lot of training, a lot of practice, a lot of development, you can actually take that inflection point, and instead of dropping off, you can actually use really, really high levels of stress to improve performance. But that takes years to develop, a lot of practice, a lot of repetition. So for the most part, we want to try to get to that sweet spot. We want to back off the peak of this curve and focus on that part where we're really getting the biggest bang for the buck. So stress and anxiety, these are emotions. These are responses to external stimuli. And they're offset, or they're set off by some sort of a trigger event. Now, for me, the progression goes from stress to anxiety. Stress is manageable. It's not really that bad. Once you hit that peak of the curve, then you're in a position of anxiety. And I used to suffer from clinical anxiety. It is impossible. It is extremely difficult to function when you have clinical anxiety because your stress level is way up here. You can't think, you can't function, you can't do anything. So instead of letting stress progress up to that level of anxiety, what we want to do is we want to really nip it in the bud before it starts to develop, before it gets too hard to do anything about it. I'm sure you've seen the saying, life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you react. This pastor named Charles Swindoll came up with this a number of years ago. Very common saying, but it really talks to the power of yourself. You have the ability to control yourself. You can't control anything else out there, but you have the ability to control, and your life is defined by how you react to the situations that you're given. So if we start thinking about, getting to that healthy 90%, what gets us to there, right? How can we get to a point where we have a really good, robust 90% reaction to what's going on? And it's all starting up here. We saw that quote early on from Ryan Day. For me, I've developed this mindset. It's discussed in my book. It's called The 7 C's of the Mindset of Optimal Performance. It captures a number of different dimensions. So the first thing is the concept of choice. Now, for me, choice is freedom. Choice is something that gives you a positive baseline emotional state. Just think of the contrast between choosing to do something or being forced or manipulated into having to do something. All right, we'll come back to the word choice here in a little bit and talk about word choice. But think about just the underlying emotional tone. There's a lot of research out there that talks about performance, and performance improves for the most part with positive emotions. If you just take a minute and think about when you were at your peak performing, what kind of emotions you were experiencing, chances are the vast majority of those emotions would be positive. Now, for me, positive emotions are very simple. They're emotions that are productive for you. Negative emotions, on the other hand, are counterproductive. They're inhibiting. They hurt your performance, things like that. There's some gray areas as well. Anger, for example. A lot of athletes use anger as a motivating factor and it pushes their performance level. So anger is one of those things that could be either a positive or a negative depending on who you are. But that first C, choice, sets your emotional baseline. You choose to do things. You are in control. It's a choice. It is a conscious choice, sometimes a subconscious choice, but it is a choice that you're making. The second thing is commitment. Commitment, if you don't commit, nothing ever gets done. So you have to commit to your course of action, make sure you're dedicating the resources, putting the effort in, things like that. It's a very simple concept. If you cannot get it done, don't commit to it. If you commit to it, find a way of getting it done. Third one, capability. You've got to believe that you have the capability of accomplishing what you're setting your goals to be. So if you're committing to something, you've got to believe you have the capability of achieving it. For me, it's not realistic to try to say, well, I'm committed. I'm choosing to go play for the Buccaneers. I'm committed. I'm short, I'm old, I'm slow. I can't really catch a ball. I definitely can't throw a football. So it's not realistic for me. Even though I might choose to, I might really commit to it, the capability is not realistic there. So you've got to be realistic. When it comes to capability, you want to push yourself. You want to challenge yourself. But you've got to keep realistic goals. But you've also got to believe that you have the capability to achieve those. Because as Henry Ford said, Henry Ford is very famous for saying, whether you believe you can or believe you can't, or whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. That's that capability. You've got to believe that you can do things. And then finally, change. And change comes in a couple of different forms. Number one, a lot of people are afraid of change. You need to change that attitude, embrace it, learn to love it. We'll talk about change here in a little bit, and fear. The other one is you've got to be willing to change. If you're moving along, or you're not moving along towards what you've committed to accomplishing, you've got to be able to change. Now, the change, all these reinforce each other. You've got to choose to change, you've got to commit to changing, and you've got to believe that you have the capability of changing. So these all become self-reinforcing mechanisms. These are what I call the fundamental four.